Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about variables in JavaScript. So on our last video we talked about arithmetic operations. So in this video we're going to talk about variables in JavaScript. So we're going to start off by creating our new file. So I'm going to call mine variables.js and I'm going to close down out this file because we don't need it. So one thing to keep in mind when we're programming in JavaScript is we need to use variables, and we need to use variables to store our data. So our data could be anything. Our data could be a string, our data could be a number. So the two main data types are strings and numbers, and when we think of a string we think of a number of characters. So we might store somebody's name in a string, or we might store somebody's favorite food in a string, but there's other things that we can store in strings as well, and we can also store numbers in strings. So if we can think of an example that contains both letters and numbers, so something like this might be a number plate. So a number plate would contain both numbers and strings, so we could only store that number plate variable within a string. We couldn't store that number plate variable within a number, because if we use numbers it doesn't allow any characters to be used. So we'll just start off with our string here. So we'll call it name, and within our name variable we're going to let it equal Ryan. So I'm going to type in Ryan here. Now we can see that Ryan is being stored in name, but this line of JavaScript isn't actually finished yet. We need to specify whether this variable name is going to be changed at a later date, and how we do that is, before we specify the name, we either use let or we use const. And for this example we're talking about names, so generally your first name doesn't change. Sometimes your second name might change if you get married, but for your first name we'll leave it as const, so we'll assume it doesn't change. Then another variable that we could take into consideration is a number. So for example we might think of an age, right? So we might have age and we might set it equal to a number, so let's say 25. Now our age changes every year, so this variable will need to be changed at some stage, so we'll set this to let. Okay, so now we're going to console log these two values just to see what our output will be. Our output should be Ryan and 25, so we'll do console.log and we'll do our brackets and we'll just copy and paste this, and we'll put in our name inside the first console log, and we'll put in our age inside our second console log, and we'll now go and run this. So we can see our output here is Ryan and 25. So now let's say for some reason we wanted to change our name Ryan. So our first name usually doesn't change, but we're going to try and change it in this example. So we're going to have name and we're going to set it equal to Chris. Okay, so I'm going to put in Chris, and we're just going to try and run this program as it is, and we can see that we get all this red text, and what this is an error. So it's basically telling us that we can't assign Chris to name because name is declared as a constant. So just to make it clear, if we change this to let, so this is saying that name can actually be changed, and we go and run this exact same code, we can see that Chris is now printed out, and it says Chris and the number 25. So as I said before, our first names usually don't change, so we're going to want to make this constant. And we're going to get rid of this because we're not changing our name. So now we've got this let age 25, and from before we know if we use the let keyword that we can change our age and it shouldn't give us an error. So to change our age, let's say age plus plus. So if you remember from our previous video, when we used the plus plus increment operator, it will increase our number by 1. So we should see 26. And we can see the output displayed is Ryan and 26. But we could also assign a completely different age. Okay, so we could say age is equal to maybe 30. And then we'd see our output as 30. And so we do. We see Ryan and 30. And imagine if we change this to const, we would then not be able to change our name on this line. So if we could try and run this, we can see that we get an error. So we need to change this back to let, because we want to be able to change our age. And we'll take this away. So if we go and run this now, we'll see the result of Ryan and 25. Currently using pretty basic information, so let's go and change this up a little bit. So we're going to get rid of our name and we're going to get rid of our age. And we're going to keep our 2 console logs, but we're going to get rid of the variables within inside them, because we're going to create 2 new variables. And the first variable that we're going to create is just going to be a license plate number, okay? So we're going to just say license, and we're going to let it equal to a license plate number. So if we remember, a license plate number will contain both numbers and letters. So if it contains both numbers and letters, we're going to have to use a string for this. And we can put in, let's say, 16.1, and then we put in hyphen, put in LM, and then you can put in whatever number you want. So now, is our license plate going to change? Our license plate on our car will never change. You know, you might replace the tires, you might replace the engine, but the license plate on the car will never change. So we're going to leave this as a const, meaning that it will not change. Then the second value that we want to input is going to be the height. I'm choosing the variable height because the height will have a decimal point in it. You could use something like the weight of the car, you could specify the speed, you could specify the duration it takes to get from 0 to 60, whatever you want to use, but I'm just going to use height because it's straightforward. So we're going to say HT, height, and we're going to say it's equal to, we'll say 165, okay? So the unit that this is being measured in is centimeters, but we're not going to specify this in this example, we're just going to say the height. We're going to assume that all our vehicles are being calculated with the exact same height. So the height of the car may change. So depending on the type of tires you put on, or if you raise or lower the suspension. So we want to put this as a let. And we can see, if we print these out, we can see we'll see license and we'll see height. So currently, if we print these out, we'd see that our license plate number and our height are the same as the values we've assigned to it. But when we're dealing with numbers in JavaScript, we can also do decimal points. So we can say 165.5, and we can go and run this, and we can see that 165.5 is being displayed. Or we can also change this to have multiple decimal places, so as many as we want. So we could say this, and we run this, and we can see that it gives a more precise measurement.